All right, so welcome to Nonprofit Management. And we are going to do our best to make sense of the professional, legal, and recommended best practices for religious organizations and churches. If you already have a 501c3, awesome. If you want to build one, also awesome. We're going to go over all the things so that everyone has a good, solid baseline. Be excited about the things that you already know, and feel free to ask questions if things arise that you don't understand. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, this is our agenda for the day. We're going to overview the nonprofit sector, talk about legal stuff, talk about governance and leadership, talk about some boring writing, do some money stuff, talk about some risky business, and then do a resource review. So, overview of the nonprofit sector. This should take us about 7 minutes, so it's just an overview. Don't feel like you have to memorize all of this. Nonprofit sector, that's typically the term that they use when they're referring to all of the folks who have some sort of 501 distinction. The name has changed over time. Sometimes it's referred to as the third sector or the independent sector or the social sector. It really just depends on when people learned their lingo. So you can kind of date yourself by what terms you use. So you'll be able to see them all. There is a glossary I will be providing for you. All of these and more are defined in terms of their relationship to the nonprofit sector in that PDF. It includes a lot of terms that we are not going to go over in this presentation, but that you will probably run into in your reading so that you'll be prepared to understand. Some quick facts about the sector. The Peabody Education Fund was pretty much the first modern nonprofit in the US. George Peabody gave a $2 million grant right after the Civil War to educate poor whites and the formerly enslaved. So the very first nonprofit was for education funding in the South. In 2022, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that we had over 300,000 nonprofit entities, and that accounts for 9.9% of all employment in the United States. 1 in 10 Americans, including myself, works in the nonprofit sector. Pretty cool. We also contribute, as of December 2024, we've contributed pretty much $1.4 trillion to the US economy or more annually. All right, nonprofit versus not-for-profit. This comes up often. These are not the same thing. Nonprofit refers to an organization that furthers a cause or operates according to a mission and not to make a profit. Not-for-profits typically serve a membership. Like a nonprofit organization, not-for-profit organizations, they host events and activities, but they're not allowed to distribute their profits or accept donations, and they don't qualify for tax-exempt status. It is acceptable and legal for nonprofits and not-for-profits to make profits as long as they follow all of the rules for their classification. The 501 code is where all the nonprofit stuff lives in the federal government. It classifies all of the organizations based on your purpose and your function, and then the specific classification that you get, like churches, ADF is a 501c3 for public charities, and that will dictate some of the rules that you have to follow. But it just has to do with taxes, because we'll talk about it in a minute. All the rest of what you do is governed by your state. Nonprofits can participate in a small amount of political lobbying as long as it's not their primary interest. And this is something that comes up sometimes. There was a law in the past where there was a huge separation between nonprofit organizations and any sort of political involvement. And that is not necessarily the case. If there is a bill that is coming up that impacts your mission directly, you are allowed to put out a statement. Churches and religious institutions fall under the 501c3. That is the place where all the public charities live. It includes educational institutions, anyone who's doing it for science, literary organizations, and all kinds of other things for like public safety, sports competitions, and all of that. It's the biggest section of the 501 code as well. Public charities. Organizations get most of their revenue as a 501c3 from the general public or from the government in the form of grants. They must get at least a third of their donations from public support. Acceptable donations can come from people, from companies, from other charitable organizations like a trust, and donors can deduct those amounts on their taxes as long as it's not more than 60% of their income. I don't know who makes so much that they can donate 60% of their income to something, but good on them. There is a note in here that a private foundation or a non-operating foundation doesn't host programs, and they don't have to be publicly supported because of that. Private foundations usually support the work of other groups through giving grants to them. So you'll have a foundation that may host or put out a call for donations, and then the nonprofits themselves can actually apply for a grant from the private foundation. So since they kind of just hold the money, they're tax exempt because they don't really spend anything. They just give money to other people. 501c4 and 501c6, these come up sometimes. Like you'll see them when you're reading some of the legalese. It'll say, unless you're a 501c6, all of this applies to blah, blah, blah. So just so you know, the 501c4 organizations are social welfare organizations. That's where your labor unions live. And 501c6 are your common interests. That's where that's where your real estate board lives, or if you have an HOA, that's kind of where that lives. All right. That is basically an overview of the nonprofit sector. Any questions about that before we go on?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Is a grant the same as a donation in the case of where that matters, where the money comes from?
It is not. Grants often come with some sort of additional reporting requirements. It's almost always earmarked for something. Usually like you'll get a grant for a specific program, and that money, how you spend the money from your grant, has to be tracked separately from how you track the money for your general operations. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
We also have a question in the chat regarding recent Supreme Court decisions that may have changed what churches are allowed to do politically.
Yes. So churches you can say whatever you want now, which is separate from specifically lobbying. I actually have a link that I can send you that shows some of the impact that the host of recent things that have been approved have, and how that has impacted the sector. I think I actually have a link already on the last page, but I will make sure it gets included.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, we've been keeping a pretty close eye on that as things are changing really quickly right now. And so it's really important that we kind of keep an eye on anything that may change what we have to do or report, just in case. Anything else? Awesome. Okay, becoming a nonprofit organization. Some of you on this call probably already belong to an organization, so it's really helpful for us to kind of go over the foundation of how you got where you are. Anybody who does not belong to a nonprofit organization, this will help you know what you need to do to get there. So hopefully this will be useful for all of us. The life cycle of a public charity. There's a whole list of links all on irs.gov that will tell you pretty much everything you need to know for which state you're at. There's the starting out phase, applying to the IRS, any of your required filings, ongoing compliance, and anything you have to do for significant events. They even have a 10-course class that you can take. It's all online, on demand, and it is for small to mid-sized tax-exempt organizations. So it's nice that it's broken into 10 small courses so that you can do it in smaller pieces and fit it into your life. I have not taken it yet myself. I have read through some of the transcripts and it looks like pretty good stuff. It mostly has to do with what the federal government requires of you. There are additional things that states require because the federal government cares what you do with your money, but the states care about everything else that you're working on. Basic steps, forming your organization. The first thing you have to do is make one up. So you have to submit a form. Everything that you do with the government has a form. You submit a form to the government, tell them what your name is, tell them who your board members are going to be. You have to have 3, the president, secretary, and treasurer. And the rest of the form is a series of check boxes that you use to categorize your organization. Are you going to accept donations? Yes. Are you going to host events? Yes. Do people have to pay for your services? No. So as you check those boxes, it tells them where to calculate your status. And as you check the boxes for church, it'll pretty much put you in a 501c3. You also have to apply for an employee identification number, an EIN. I get this question often. People ask, if I'm a nonprofit and I don't have employees, why do I have to have an EIN? And the answer is because if you don't have one, people who donate to you can't write it off on their taxes. This is what allows your donations to be tax deductible for the people who give you money. So you definitely want to have an SS4 filed. This is required also. If you don't have an EIN and you accept contributions and you give a receipt and someone tries to deduct that causes problems. If your responsible party changes at any time, you have to fill out a form for that as well. This includes if you change your address or location. You have to report any changes in responsible parties to the IRS within 60 days. So as an umbrella organization, which we'll get to in the next slide, we report this to the parent organization, who for ADF members is the ADF Mother Grove. So that's why when you fill out your quarterly report, they ask you if there are any officer changes. It's required that they know that. And technically, we should let them know prior to the next quarterly report because we have to report within 60 days, but we report our quarterly report every 90 days. You must have your articles of organization, copies, bylaws, description of your activities, and your financial data all ready for review at the time that you submit your application for an EIN. They are assuming that you've already been doing stuff and you have some seed money to start you up. And so they want you to have all of that together before you apply so that you can answer some questions about it, because they want to make sure that you are set up already to hit the ground running and be successful and to be in compliance with all the requirements. Any questions about that?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Who in ADF files those changes?
So because ADF is a large organization, we have what's called a registered agent. We have a person that sits on our board of directors. She is our administrator, and she works closely with a group called Cogency Global. They are our, basically they're like a legal entity that you pay a fee to manage all of your work. And so we let them know, hey, we've had a change. Hey, we've had this. And then they say, okay, I need this and this and this from you. And then you tell them that information and then they file it on your behalf. But if you are small and you don't belong to a large organization, you have to do all of that yourself. They've made the forms really easy though in the nonprofit sector, because there's a lot of them that have check marks that say, do you have this? And they're expecting you to say no, or to say yes. And if you want to check no, please don't. Please go get that thing and then check yes on the box.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is an EIN tied to the group and not an individual, even though it's called an individual identification number?
It's the employer identification number. So the employer is the organization itself.
Okay, because I had started a small business at one time and had to have one for tax reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Is it all right to hold more than one?
Yes, you have different ones for different purposes. The one that you hold personally is your social security number. The one that's taught you, each organization has its own separate number. So ADF has an EIN, and then every Grove has their own as well. You actually have to have an EIN before you can be put under the umbrella of the larger organization. And if you are on the board of directors for multiple organizations, which some people are, then each separate employer or corporation or organization has its own number. They're kind of like the SSNs for organizations.
So does every grove in ADF have an EIN, or do we
Sure
have to
do.
ask for it?
Every grove in or ADF should have its own EIN. Part of the grove organizing work is to get your EIN because that is what allows you to be folded under the umbrella of the parent organization.
Where do we find that? I don't remember hearing about it.
That's an excellent question. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can find that and get that back to you, Creel.
And for clarity, I think it's proto groves don't necessarily have an EIN, but fully chartered groves do. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Correct. It's weird because if you don't have an EIN, you are not technically under the umbrella of ADF's protection. You are allowed to use all of our branding because ADF said so, but you really shouldn't be accepting donations or managing a lot of money if you don't have an EIN. You can't get a bank account without an EIN, and we're going to talk about finances in a bit, and I have a lot to say about finances. EINs are super important. Even if you are not under an umbrella organization, I highly recommend that you get one as soon as possible in the early phases of your organization so that you can separate what belongs to your organization and what belongs to you and keep those far apart. Startup organizations, one of the things that they get in trouble for the most is the blending of personal resources and organizational resources.
I also did want to toss something out there, just kind of playing off of the uh, transformation from Proto Grove to being amalgamated with the larger umbrella. And then I believe it was Creel also that mentioned like the process to obtain EINs. Just from my own experience, I looked over that, and I'm within Illinois, and I know that that's a very simple part of the process. When you go to apply through the IRS, it's kind of generated alongside it, but that's very anecdotal to my experience. To the other side of that, the other prong of what I wanted to ask was, could you explain a little bit about the process of you become Proto Grove, and then you get incorporated and you become Full Grove. What's kind of the onboarding process from Grove to being accepted into that umbrella of ADF at large?
Onboarding process, we don't have one. The short version is we don't have one. Once you petition to become a fully chartered grove and you put yourself under the umbrella of ADF, the hope is that you will join the Senior Druids list and have them as resources. The Grove Organizers Handbook was revised recently. I think it was in 2023 when Brian Larder was still the chief of the Council of Senior Druids. So I would check there and start with the other senior druids about what types of things you need to work through as you transition to that next step.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We have two questions in the chat. One, is there an exception for groves outside of the US? And on the issue of commingling funds, are there issues with board members donating to the grove?
Okay, let me answer the first one first and then ask me the second one again. So outside of the United States, ADF does not have international recognition. If you are a grove outside of the United States, you do not fall under ADF's tax exempt umbrella. Outside of the United States, you have to go through your local government to become tax exempt in your space. So there's nothing there. Being under our umbrella gives you permission to use all of our stuff. It allows you to manage all of our copyrighted stuff, to use our logo and branding and all of our other, like you can pull our documents over and use them for yourself if you want. But you will have to manage your own tax exempt status within your own country. ADF Germany has currently been going through a lot of this, and I can help you get in contact with some of those folks if that is useful to you. I know that they're also doing some work with ADF Canada. They're in Ottawa, the folks that were working on it, but the rules might be different depending upon where within your country you are trying to get your tax exempt status. And the rules are very different. So all you get from us is you get the use of ADF's resources for education, and you can borrow a lot of our documentation if you need it to help adopt for your own policies.
And then the second question, after you were talking about commingling funds, are there issues with board members donating to the Grove?
No, actually, board members are encouraged to donate. There are other nonprofits where if you are invited to sit on the board, that there is an expectation that you will donate to the board or to the organization. The board members should be your largest advocates and supporters of the work that you're doing. If they're not, then that might be an issue when you are trying to get more of your work done. Keep your organization motivated to follow all of its processes, to engage in the programs, and make sure that your client population doesn't suffer. But yeah, directors are encouraged to donate to the organization. Great questions, you guys. Okay, I keep saying umbrella organization. An umbrella organization, that's kind of the older term for it. When you're reading through the documentation, they're going to talk about group exemptions. There is a parent organization, and then there are the subordinate organizations or child organizations, depending upon when your document was written. The larger parent organization may provide some resources to the subordinate organizations. Typically, they provide identity to them, which is why we all have ADF after our Grove name. And we are under their the umbrella organization responsibility and control. So if they change something that they require of their subordinates, we have to comply. If we don't, then we end up getting kicked out. The IRS allows organizations that are affiliated with a central organization to apply for tax exempt status as a group because it saves everybody time and paperwork. And then the IRS doesn't have to review everybody who's all using the same documents. So it really works in favor for everyone. But the central organization does take responsibility for everything that the subordinate organizations do. Currently, however, filing for group exemption has been paused. So if you already have a group exemption, you can put people underneath of it. That's not a problem. But as of June 2020, the IRS paused requests for new group exemptions. They're currently not examining any group exemption applications. They were reviewing their procedures on how they're managing group exemptions. I have not seen an update in a very long time. This is still current on the IRS website, so I have no idea when they're going to get back to it. We're okay though, because we have our group exemption, so we can just move right along. Ongoing compliance is one of the things that most of us who already belong to an established organization are worried about. Anytime that there's a significant event, you have to make sure that that's included to be reported to your organization. Most nonprofits have to file a Form 990, which is the nonprofit organization version of a 1040 that we have to fill out. As churches, you don't have to file a 990. However, with a big H, it is a best practice that your board of directors fill one out as a board practice once every 3 years. We'll talk about it later, but if you get audited, they want to see 3 years worth of your data, and filling out a Form 990 will help you organize everything. So if you ever do get audited, you can just hand them that folder and say, here you go. It also makes sure that you have the checklist of everything that you're supposed to have. They also have guidance for reporting any changes to help you get through that process. Change of the registered agent. If you change your org president, you will need to report that if you don't belong to an umbrella organization or have a registered agent. Like I said, we have a registered agent, Cogency Global, and they have an address in Delaware, which is our state of incorporation. Also, if you decide to close your organization, you are required to close your organization officially with a form with the IRS, and you can be fined if you don't. Okay, applicable laws. This is mostly going to be a place where I give you links to the stuff that might matter to you. I'm not going to go through and read legalese to you, even though Jane would probably love to have that discussion, but we can totally talk later. The basic sources for all of this includes mostly the IRS. They have a series of publications and forms. The American Bar Association has this swell guidebook for directors of nonprofit corporations. They have a nonprofit organizations committee that goes through and puts together everything that you could possibly need to know about managing your organization from a legal lens. And then they also have this book, which is the Guide to Representing Religious Organizations. And that's where it's easy to kind of pull out some of the pitfalls that organizations may fall into and some of the legal precedent that has been set through court proceedings with various things that have happened. There's also a lot of information and best practice guides from some web-based resources. And there's a link to many of these on the last page of this of the whole presentation, which I will export so you can click the links. Applicable laws. The number one place for you to look for information is Publication 1828. And there's a handy link here in green that will take you to that publication. It's written in layman's terms so that you can understand, and it talks about pretty much everything that you need to know about managing a 501c3 church or religious organization. The biggest area of concern for all nonprofits is money, and it's how you spend money that is related or not related to your mission statement. The filing requirements are separate from a tax return. So the Form 990 comes up. There may be separate forms that you have to file. Some states require an e-postcard, for example, every 10 years, where you have to say, yes, I'm still active. Yes, that's still my address. Here's my $10, state of Colorado. Thank you. So please make sure that you're paying attention to not just Publication 1828, but what your state requires. And we'll talk about the states in a bit. Annual filing requirements are on page 27 and 28. The 990T is the only thing that you may have to file at some point if you ever make more than $1,000 in an unrelated business venture. And then the Form 1099 NEC, if you pay any individual more than $600 in a calendar year, they are now one of your paid people. They're an independent contractor with you, and now you have to pay them. Keep an eye on all of your requirements. The government will charge you a fine of 120 days for every day you are late. In an umbrella organization, if that is something that, like, say, Mountain Ancestors pays me $800 and they don't fill out this form, you can't just give somebody $800. That is now considered me just getting money from the org for no apparent reason. You have to make it legal. So you have to pay somebody for services. If Mountain Ancestors did not file with the government, then for every 120 days late, your organization gets charged. And at some point, your organization runs out of money. And because you belong to an umbrella, ADF, the Mother Grove, the parent organization, would have to pay the rest of your fines. So please make sure you're keeping good track of who's getting money from where and what your limits are for certain types of things. Employment tax. Churches and religious organizations are not exempt from employment tax. That is a requirement. The big list of information is actually in Publication 15A, which 1828 will refer you to. So if you get to the point where you're paying people, definitely read this before you pay them. Before you pay people, please make sure you understand what you're supposed to do. The difference between employees and independent contractors is mostly, does someone get a W-2 or does someone get a 1099? It is highly recommended that you give someone a 1099 because the 1099 means that all the organization has to do is report the non-employee compensation to the government and then give the 1099 to the recipient of those monies. And then the person who receives the monies will handle that with their own tax return and make sure their taxes are paid out of that. A W-2 means that we pay their taxes on their behalf, and then they get a W-2, and hopefully what we have collected from them in taxes is enough to pay the taxes that they owe on the money that they received from us. So from an organizational standpoint, I know that sounds really cold. From an organizational standpoint, which is where we're talking about, it is easier for us as very tiny small groups to have everybody paid as an independent contractor than it is to have any actual employees. And if you're not sure if someone is an employee or an independent contractor, because there are other things that factor into that, the IRS actually has a form that you can fill out and they will review the position for you and tell you whether or not that person should be an independent contractor or an employee. Income tax, clergy are also not tax exempt. Pagan clergy are often paid by the individual receiving services rather than the organization. If this is the case, keep in mind that you still are supposed to pay taxes on that $600, any more than $600 that you receive in a given year. Even if it's from individuals, it counts as income. Otherwise, you're managing under the table work. If you receive payment for clerical services from your church, you may be exempt if all of your money is turned over to the organization. So if you are the senior priest of the Grove and they decide that senior priest should get whatever X amount of money, you can say, no, I don't want that money. I would like to offer my services pro bono. All of you, please keep this. However, you still have to count that as money that you have earned and then write it off as a charitable contribution. So there's lots of rules around income. We don't typically manage this well as pagans because our dollar amounts are so low. Most of the time, we offer a lot of services for free that we don't realize that there are thresholds and things that we have to do. So just keep all of this in mind.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep. Go ahead.
Which one of us?
Creel,
If-
Creel, you
if
go
we're-
first.
If, for example, you are performing hand tying ceremonies, can you not have the Grove be the one that's performing those and not a person individually?
You can. You can if you, so here, let me give an example because maybe this will help. So let's say my first example was you're a pagan clergy and someone hires you to facilitate their service. And so they pay you directly. Okay. The other option is that they pay the Grove. You can then get money from the Grove, but now the Grove is paying you for those services. So you have to kind of keep track of the money because all the government cares about, where's the money going? The other option is that you get paid and then you donate half of the money to the Grove. Another way you can handle that is that the money goes to the Grove and then you submit a reimbursement form for all of your expenses, mileage, food, overnight if you had to go travel somewhere to stay overnights to perform a service the next day at a distance. So it really depends on what works best for you. It just really depends on how you want to manage it, what your dollar amounts are going to be, and what makes the most sense for everybody involved. I would definitely talk through that with your clergy and your board and see what works best for you as individuals. There's no wrong way to manage it. You manage it the way that makes the most sense. And remember, the first $600 as the person receiving funds, the first $600 are yours. So as long as you don't make more than $600, you can do whatever you want. It's after that $600 mark that it matters. Does that help?
Related question.
Mm-hmm.
So for Three Cranes Grove, we have weddings are $300.
Okay.
And that person can use our PayPal link on our website to pay the Grove $300.
Yep.
Is that, so I see this next slide is like the fee for service model. So because that is the fee, is that still, how do we track that? Because it's not a donation.
That
It,
is
like,
income. Correct.
Okay.
So we will talk about income for the organization separately. So put a pin in that.
Okay.
The biggest difference is that for individuals, if you pay somebody more than $600, then it's considered taxable. If you receive more than $1,000, the first $1,000 you receive as an organization is yours. After $1,000, then you have to look at it and decide whether or not the money that you're receiving is related to your mission or not. Because if it's
How
unrelated
are-
business income, then you have to pay taxes on it. If it's completely related to your mission, then that is money that you have received. And if it's a fee for service thing, there's other minutia in there, so we could talk about that separately.
What about like reimbursements? So like we have a Grove member who buys all the flyers for some event and we want to reimburse them the money they spent.
Yep.
How is that payment?
That's completely separate. Yep,
Completely
that
separate,
is,
okay.
so, I actually have slides in the financial part of this to talk
Cool.
about, the expense reimbursement process and a policy, and how that's tracked. So that,
Okay.
I got
Thank
you,
you.
that's covered.
One more.
Uh-huh.
How do volunteers fall into all of this? So, for example, as the senior druid of my grove, I volunteer all of my services. I give them freely with no expectation of reimbursement or wage.
Yep.
So someplace earlier, you had said something about if someone is doing all of this stuff and all of this stuff, that you had to pay them for their work. Maybe that I just misunderstood what you were saying, but if I put in 1,000 hours over the course of, no, I don't put in, but say if I put in 1,000 hours over the course of a year,
Mhm.
I don't get paid anything.
Right. So the question for you as a volunteer is, do you want your time, the UU sums it up the best. You can offer them your time, your talent, or your treasure. So you can give them money, you can give them time for things, or you can give them some kind of in-kind service. If you work in your regular life as a person who manages computer programming and your Grove website is abysmal and you want to really help them out with that, you can give them in-kind services, which means that you do that work for them, and then the Grove would give you back a receipt for the hourly wage that someone that they would have hired would have made to do that same work. And then that person who donated that service can write it off in their taxes. If you are a volunteer who just likes to show up and do stuff and you don't want any recognition or anything, then that is all free of yours to give. You can give that time and you can give your talents as much as you want. What matters is when the volunteer wants something in return. Then you have to have a bigger conversation about what that looks like.
Okay. That answers the question, is that as long as there's no expectation of being paid or reimbursed or anything else, it doesn't matter. Just
Correct.
go forth and do good.
Yep, your time is yours, and if you choose to give it to the organization that you're affiliated with, then blessings on you, sir. Yep.
Reverend, if you do it without any paperwork, volunteers, then they don't have any recourse if something happens with the ADF group as a whole organization, right? Like if they were to be injured while volunteering, right now, does a motherboard have insurance to catch that kind of thing?
So this is an unpopular answer, but if you as a Grove are hosting a thing and someone gets hurt at your thing, the Grove is liable for that. It's one of the reasons why they highly recommend event insurance if you're hosting an event that someone may get hurt at. One of the ways to get around that is to have them sign a waiver. that says, yes, I'm participating in this park cleanup. Yes, I know that there was a lot of drug activity here, and if I get stabbed by a piece of contraband, that I'm not holding this group liable. That's my example because that actually happened to somebody. So make sure that you look at whatever events you're hosting, whether they are events people are paying for or events that are to kind of gather your volunteers to do a service. You're responsible for anything that happens under your Grove's name.
Does the Mother Grove have some suggested language for waivers? And I ask this because I was told that having a waiver, a hold harmless waiver, doesn't actually mean very much at all if someone takes you to court.
It means more than you think. It definitely means more than you think. It doesn't mean nothing. The short answer is no, ADF does not have recommended language. I would look at your state resources to see what most states have a lot of example forms that you can use. So do several of the organizations that I have linked at the end of this presentation that will help you to figure out what's the best language for the thing that I'm doing, what should people fill out. And generally, make sure that you put boundaries around what you do and do not want people to engage in while they're in your care. We are doing these specific things. If you decide to engage in stuff outside of this specific thing, you are on your own and breaking protocol, and now you are no longer participating in the event. You are doing something over there. Just keeping it very, very clear is kind. Clear is what will help everybody be on the same page.
Ray, I'd also say bring that to the Senior Druid Council. Because that
Okay.
would be where a lot of resources live. And if it needs to get escalated up, that's the process for escalating it up to the Mother Grove.
Right.
It'll probably be me who has to write it.
Probably. Hey, I might just bounce it to the lawyer. You don't know.
Well,
Oh, I love that.
actually, we have a lawyer that has done some pro bono work for him, and I think that's probably what I'm going to do is bounce it to him, because he's gonna know the answers for Virginia, which
Yep.
is what I actually care. Not to say that I don't care about what happens in Colorado, but I don't care what happens in Colorado.
Right. Well, you shouldn't. You have too much to worry about in Virginia. You don't need to worry about what happens in Colorado. That's my job.
Exactly.
Yep. Are there any questions in the chat? Okay. Okay, everybody take a stretch break. Take a minute. We can take 10 minutes here if you would like, or we can stretch and get back to it sooner than that. Let me know what you need. But that was a lot, so I wanted you guys to have a minute to kind of think through that.
Will you unshare your screen so I can see faces?
Yep. I'm clicking. Hold on. Oh, it's over here. Okay.
Yay.
Okay.
I've
Excellent.
co-opted Jeff's because mine is running the big screen.
Oh no, mute yourself, Jess.
I'm trying.
As a professional administrator of video conferencing, that's probably the number one problem in video conferences, is where people are like casting from their phone to their TV and somehow or another get that loop a running.
There is something about audio that just messes with everything, right? And it's always the audio that's screwy. I have to show off my oldest child is turning 21 on Tuesday, and I have been requested to make a yellow layer cake with chocolate pudding filling and cocoa frosting. So I am making birthday cake while I learn about Grove administration.
That looks delicious.
Yeah, it came out really good. This is a doctored cake mix. So it's a cake mix with extra. It's an extra
Yeah.
cake mix.
Yeah.
With sour cream and pudding mix and stuff in it.
So the good kind of extra.
Yes, the good kind of extra.
Hey, I'm
And then
extra
the-
and I'm good.
The
True.
pudding filling is cream cheese and chocolate pudding and heavy cream, basically, and powdered sugar, and that stiffens up into like a slightly stiffer chocolate pudding that I use to put this inside the layers. And the cocoa frosting is, of all things, Betty Crocker's 1972 Betty Crocker cookbook has a recipe for cocoa frosting that I discovered because I wanted to make chocolate frosting and then discovered that there was not a single bar of chocolate in my house. But I had a tub of cocoa powder, and so I made the cocoa frosting, and it's very, very good. So that is now my staple chocolate frosting. And the rule in my house is we all share the birthday cake. And then after we have had birthday cake and everybody has had some that we put candles on and sing over, it is the birthday person's cake after that. And anybody else who wants some has to ask. And I made this cake for my youngest when she turned 16 in June. And I think in 2 days she consumed the entire rest of the cake and nobody else got any. So my oldest has requested it. So we're reprising that cake.
Sounds like good cake.
I take birthdays very seriously in my house because I have stepkids and none of them had particularly great starts in the world. So I can do birthday cake, right?
Okay,
I've-
so is
got
anybody
about-
else totally overwhelmed?
By the
Not yet.
nonprofit management stuff.
Unfortunately or unfortunately, this is far from my first nonprofit board experience. And so, yeah, no, not yet.
Gonna say I had to go through the rigmarole of founding one about 5 or 6 years ago and learned a lot through that process.
Yeah,
It was-
I also founded one and I had somebody who was doing a lot of the administrator work for me and discovered like 3 years later after he left that he didn't do any of it. So
Ooh,
that was fun. Yeah.
that's
Brady?
why I'm fortunate
I
enough
work
to have an
for
attorney in my
a
area who works
university
pro bono.
in their 1099 system. So I actually am paying outside independent contractors and things. So I'm on both sides of this, and it makes my brain very happy to hear Missy essentially say the things I've been saying for 5 years. So yay.
I'm just really glad that you view your new role as treasurer with such import. It makes me so happy.
I'm
I
kind
am
of
just-
a long-time lurker when it comes to establishing any organization. I've looked at a lot of religious, spiritual kind of planning on that level. But anyone who does feel kind of antsy towards kind of addressing or identifying these steps, one thing I would maybe throw out there is I found a really great free channel on YouTube by a YouTuber called Melanie Smith, I believe her name is. And she covers everything very surgically when it comes to starting up an organization. So that kind of empowered me a little bit at least.
Yeah, the other thing I will say about my experience is that, at least in my case, the people I was dealing with at the IRS were actually really nice and helpful. And if they see signs that you are trying to get things right and are, and if you're a little bit slow on something, but they need, you find out the situation, if they know you're trying to get things right and you're not like handling a huge amount of money, they are willing to work with you. Generally
See, I-
speaking, my experience is they want you to get it right. And, they're obviously on the lookout for people who are trying to do fraudulent stuff, but if you're trying to do things right, they will help you.
Yeah, I feel like there's only like 4 people working at the IRS right now, so
There is that, but I will say that the IRS went through a period, especially in the 80s and 90s, where they were really legitimately predatory and terrible. And they got a really bad reputation. And then somebody new came on in control of the IRS and was like, screw that. And the IRS went through a whole huge retraining and culture change. And the people that you work with one-on-one when you need help from the IRS, in every instance that I have needed them in the last 5 or 6 years, have been people who wanted to help. They want you to get it right. They want to be the expert to help guide you through whatever you're trying to learn. They really turned that around. Now, whether that's going to be true in the year of our Gourd 2025, with everything else that's going on, I don't know. But I can say that every time I've needed a person with the IRS in the last 5 or 6 years, I guess, is when I really have had to call them a couple of times. They've been really good.
And I wish I could say that.
Ugh, I hate when that
Go.
happens.
Cause I got the crew who said, oh yeah, by the way, I work for the IRS and I know that you came to me to ask me the question. And I know that I gave you an answer to your question, but the tax code is so complicated that if I'm wrong, it's still your fault.
Yeah, no, I have never had that, but I think it may just be individual then, because everybody, like I said, it's been, I mean, I thought we were all squared away. I thought Nine Waves was all squared away with the government and the state of Texas and everything else, and we were accepting donations as a 501c3 and giving receipts. And then I went to go get all of those documents because the person who had been managing all of that left the Grove to go move, and I mean, like, not bad feelings, but just like life happened and he moved away. And it didn't exist.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, in terms of like money, we had like $1,000 in a cash box. Like that was the total sum of the assets of Nine Waves Grove. So
Yeah.
fortunately, it was not terribly hard to fix. But I mean, I definitely had a fire under my butt to get it all filed away, you can bet.
Well, I think that'll be a beautiful segue into some of the governance questions that are going to come up around, I suspect.
Thank
I was
to
gonna say,
God.
speaking of.
Thank the gods I had a legal professional do my stuff.
All right, is everybody ready to get started?
Yep.
All right. Let's share again. And go. And go. And go. Okay. Oh, went back to the beginning. That's the worst. Okay. Ooh, that was not what I thought it was.
No, when you do that and discover that your drive has disappeared is the worst.
All right, I need to go to this slide. Okay. All right. So let's take a step back before we start composing documents and discuss how to run our organization. We need to define the who's and what's. So we got to define our board and set some expectations for what it means to be responsible for a nonprofit. Board of directors, nonprofit organizations all have a board who manages governance and leadership. Governance refers to the processes, systems, and instructions that guide how an organization is directed, controlled, and held accountable, including operating for the purposes outlined in the mission statement and within all bounds of legal expectations. Basically, you're responsible for making sure that your organization is doing everything that it's supposed to do and not doing any bad stuff. That's your job. The board is responsible for overall board operations. The duties of the board are defined first by the state and second by the board itself. So the minimum stuff that your board has to do is what's outlined as requirements by your state. And then you can make your board do whatever else you want by putting it into your bylaws. Every state has a page on their website, it's mandatory, that will guide you to the requirements for your board of directors and any other aspects of leading and managing that nonprofit. Colorado, I'm going to use the example for where I am, but please know that every state has one. The Colorado Revised Nonprofit Corporation Act, blah, 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 page 32, they talk about the requirements for board of directors. Basically, they tell you that you have to manage your board according to whatever board practices are, but here's some training for some specific items that we need you to manage. And they say the board is responsible for governing and organizing. Board may delegate if it needs to. The board is responsible for protecting the charitable assets. The board should manage everybody to ensure the organization is operating in a way that's going to allow it to continue to operate. And you have to follow the fiduciary duties that are outlined for all of your officers. The best resource for the fiduciary duties comes from the American Bar Association. And they talk about the duty of loyalty, duty of care, and duty of obedience, which are big fancy words that we don't necessarily like to see like this. Loyalty, you have to make sure that as a board of directors, as a member, that you are putting the interests of the organization ahead of any private interests that you have. In other words, you may not profit to the detriment of the organization. You cannot steal from your org. That's not okay. Duty of care. You have to be engaged in your role. You have to devote the time that it takes to do your job well. You have to pay attention to what it is that you're doing so that you can exercise sound judgment and make good decisions for the organization. If you get a title, but you don't go to any meetings and you don't follow up on any of the minutes and you don't vote in anything and you're not participating, you are in breach of duty of care. And duty of obedience mostly just means that you are following all the rules. You have to follow all your local, state, and federal laws, as well as any additional rules that are in your bylaws. And those are the three things, the basic three fiduciary duties that all state governments are going to expect of you. And what it means, that like the bullet pointed list of what you have to be loyal to, or what care looks like, or what you have to be obedient to, that's going to be subject to physically where your organization is. You also need to have proper standards of conduct for your nonprofit directors, including making good faith decisions. If you make a decision that an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would have made, then that's you're conducting yourself well, and it must be done in a manner that the director or officer reasonably believes to be in the best interest of the organization. What? Basically. All nonprofits are required to have a board. The board is responsible for what the organization does or doesn't do. All board members are required to show up, make sure all the required work gets done on time and done well, ensure all money is carefully tracked and responsibly managed, and make decisions in alignment with legal requirements as well as the organization's defining documents. You also must conduct yourself in a way that any reasonable person in a similar situation would, with the best interests of the organization in mind. Plus all the paperwork stuff. Does that make sense?
And Reverend, this is just for Colorado that you're going over now as an example?
So these are all directly from the Colorado Revised Nonprofit Corporation Act. And the board responsibilities here are very vague, and yours will be variations on a theme. The fiduciary duties are going to be almost the same. Some places have 5 instead of 3. Did I bookmark it? Duties of the officer. I did. So you may see it listed as, I want the list. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. Oh, there was a sub list somewhere. Those are the big 3 that everybody has. But there are some additional ones. Some of these may be split up into more than one, so you can have up to 5 from your state government that they want you to manage. The big thing is that under duty of loyalty, that is where you'll see all of the conflict of interest stuff come up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at length in a bit.
We have a question in the chat, whether this is guided by the state that Grove is incorporated or the state that ADF is incorporated in.
Good question. This is the state that your Grove is incorporated in.
My question specifically, is it the state that the nonprofit's incorporated in? So like ADF as the big organization is Delaware?
Yes, the parent organization is beholden to Delaware. The subordinate organizations are beholden to ADF as well as their local state.
And that's because Delaware is very, very charitable towards charitable organizations.
And that's
It's
because
also
in
important to-
1983 we said, "Yay, Delaware."
Well, there's other reasons too, but yeah, you'll find a lot of nonprofits are from Delaware simply because of Delaware's rules. It's also
Delaware
important to
has
note, though,
almost no rules. Delaware basically says they have no separate rules for corporations. All of their documentation says corporations, and they have no separate rules for businesses or for nonprofits. So if you are a corporation in Delaware, there is a small subset of things that you have to do. Basically, they don't want you to be a jerk. Make sure that you're managing your money well, and then go get them, Tiger.
it's also important to note that just because you have to have a minimum of 3 people, that doesn't mean that you can only have 3 people on your board.
It
You can
might.
have-
It actually might.
Oh, well, okay, I'm sorry. I should have appended that by saying in Virginia.
Yep. So in Colorado, you actually only have to have 1 person. It depends on the state you're in. Some states require you to have all 3 of those officers be different people. Some states require the president and the treasurer to be separate people, but the secretary can be one of those people as well. In Colorado, all 3 of those people can be the same person. You can be a business of 1. You can have a board of 1.
Cool.
Yep, it depends on where you're standing. So you have to check your state rules because that is going to dictate what you can and can't do.
But
Unless
what
you
I-
belong to ADF, in which case you have to have all 3 because ADF bylaws said so.
What I was saying though is that the board of directors can have more than the minimum required. So
can.
like Virginia requires us to have 3. But if I'm have a special program and I want someone to be in charge of that special program, and it's a fundraiser or whatever, that person can be on the board as the director of Go Out and Get 'Em Tiger.
And you could do that. That's one of the things that you can do. You can ad hoc add people to the board for the duration of a project. It's more common for there to be a point person that program manager talks to on the board, and then the board representative reports up. Just because there are items talked about on a lot of boards that aren't necessarily useful for everybody else to know about, especially if you have like a confidential matter that you have to bring up for a specific member or a specific situation that really shouldn't be for public discussion. So yeah, you can make decisions based on what works best for your Grove and how you have things set up and what the needs are for that specific program or project. A lot of times people will create a committee.
Right.
Okay, conflicts of interest. This is a huge hot topic. A lot of places where you'll go through their board training, they talk at length about conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest exist. They are. That is not a thing that we are saying. We are not saying you should not have any conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest arise. What do you do with them? That's what we want to look at. It may exist between the nonprofit and one of its directors. It may be a related party. It may be another business that one of the directors is affiliated with. It really just depends on what you're trying to do and what the circumstances are for the individuals that are part of that decision. One of the things that was fascinating to me was that there were several different mentions of giving nonprofits giving loans to officers or directors in the training for Colorado. It was very clear that like no nonprofit should, and this is just, I think this is universal. It's specifically not allowed under Colorado law, but your organization should not be loaning officers or directors money. Please don't give loans to people. Don't do that. I didn't know that was a thing that somebody had done, so I wanted to call it out because we definitely don't want to get into that space. It is not prohibited to have a conflict. Any transaction may continue to proceed, even if there is a conflict, as long as it's disclosed ahead of time and the people making the decision are aware of it. Typically, the person who is involved in the conflict is either not involved in the conversation or is also recused from the vote. Every nonprofit corporation should have their own conflict of interest policy, which clarifies that you have a responsibility to disclose any conflicts on an ongoing basis. A lot of places will have you file a form every year that says, that has questions like, do you run another business? Do you run a for-profit business? Do you sit on a board of directors for any other organization? They'll ask you if you have an invested a monetary investment in another company. Specific things like that that you'll disclose on that form and then sign that annually is pretty typical. There also should be a process for documenting any sort of conflict of interest that arises, so that it's very clear that, yes, we knew this was a thing. Yes, we talked about it. Here's what we did to mitigate the risk of that conflict. That's all that you're required to do. Having a conflict is not bad. It's what you do about it that really is going to matter. And that will show the integrity of your board. Here's all the legalese that you can read. I'm not going to read that to you. Feel free to go through it. But it talks about some of the examples that might be helpful for you. Mandatory officers, universal and state requirements for leaders. The government usually requires these three officers: president, secretary, treasurer. Your titles can be whatever you want. Your president can be your senior druid, your high priestess, your CEO, your executive director. You can call your secretary the administrator. You can call them the archivist or the scribe. Your treasurer can be your purse warden, your budget leader, your financial manager. It doesn't matter what you call them. The government wants you to have a person who is the president role, a person who manages all of your documentation, and a person who's responsible for tracking your money. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have other officers, but the minimum viability is that these three jobs are covered. The number of people, like I said, depends on what your state says. In Colorado, all three of those can be one person. There are some states that require two or for them to all be unique individuals.
We have a question in the chat about the roles of these officers. Can you
Yep.
compare the role of an executive director versus president of the board and founders?
The president of the board is separate from the executive director. The president of the board is not the same thing as the president of the organization. The president of the board is responsible for the board. The president of the organization is responsible for the org. We used to call that person the chairman of the board, but we've moved away from that language because it uses chairman, and we wanted to find something that was more gender neutral. And using president for both roles has caused there to be a lot of confusion. The chair of the board chair is also commonly used to help separate those two. The founder probably was the president at some point, but once they are no longer the president, they the only real thing that they can do is to claim intellectual property if they don't like a decision you're making. Just because you're the founder doesn't mean you are responsible for everything once you give those offices away. If you're not sitting in the chair, it's no longer your show to make all the decisions about. Founders are encouraged to stay in an advisory role, but there's a whole founder syndrome is a whole thing. Organizational identity threat and founder syndrome. I can geek out about that with you guys at some points. It's a little bit out of scope for what we're doing today, but founder involvement is something that is sometimes very tricky to navigate.
Thank you for covering that. And then I guess just kind of elaborating on the confusion there between executive directors and presidents. You know, they can't obviously be I don't know if they can be the same or if they have to be separate, specific to Illinois even. But rather than even that, I think, could you explain any differences between, you know, like if your board is volunteer, but then you have employees, you know, like an executive director, is, you know, that feasible or practical, or
Yep.
you know, what's kind of your wisdom there?
So it's very common for your board. So ideally, best practice is that your board members are not paid and they all have a vote on the board. Your executive director is an employee of the board who has an advisory role on the board, is paid, and does not have a vote. Typically, when you're deciding who gets paid and who doesn't, and who has a vote and who doesn't, the people who get paid should not have a vote, because that is a conflict of interest, and that's specifically called out in several of the states.
That's crystal. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And am I right, in ADF circles, those are the people that fall under non-director officers?
So, no.
No.
Well, put a pin in that. I don't know if I have a slide for that. Let me get through some more of these officer things, and then I'll see if it's covered, and if not, then I'll come back to this question. Thanks.
Okay.
Fun fact, Colorado doesn't really care what your officers do. You just have to have them. Instead, Colorado has partnered with the Colorado Nonprofit Association, and those folks have a whole board that develops principles and practices for nonprofit excellence in Colorado. And Colorado wholesale checks off the box for, if you're following all of these things, then you're awesome. Some states do have in their nonprofit regulations what they want those roles to do. And some states do not, but most states do have a lot of resources or are partnered with other organizations that can give you more detailed information. And getting the information from one of your closely affiliated nonprofit associations is way better than just trying to figure it out from the legal code, because the legal code is very easy to misinterpret as a layperson, and has a lot of potential for you to get yourself in trouble for misunderstanding. Commonalities among all presidents is that they have oversight for operational management. They are responsible for strategic planning and implementation of any of those plans, for spearheading fundraising initiatives, for being responsible for community engagement and any public relations that you're doing, and for ensuring regulatory compliance. If anybody in your nonprofit gets in trouble for doing something that breaks regulatory requirements, you'll typically see that the president is the one who's held responsible, whether they were involved or not, because that's their job. They're supposed to know what everybody's doing and whether or not they're following the rules. Everybody should be reporting up to the president everything that's happening in their area, because that person is ultimately responsible for what's happening in the entire organization. Secretary is kind of your chief communication officer. Most of the time they schedule your meetings, publish your notices. They are your archivist. They are responsible for all of your organizational records and document control. They usually transcribe your minutes. Some people have them also updating websites or blogs or sending out newsletters. It really just depends on the best way for your group to communicate and to keep track of all of their documentation. And the treasurer, all treasurers by their very nature are sacred, because they are the people that keep us out of the most trouble. And their duties are basically anything that money touches, they're responsible for. They manage all financial management, all of our accounting and budgeting. They are responsible for financial reports to the board and to the public, which is required. And they have an oversight and advisory role for any monetary decision that we make. And anyone else on the board is up to you. Okay, so non-officer directors and non-director officers. Non-officer directors are people who sit on your board who do not have another role in your organization. So, we actually have in ADF, we actually have non-officer directors, NODs, that sit on the board. They are voted in under an election process, and they sit on the board. They are not responsible for anything else. Most of their job description is other duties as assigned, because they are there to sit on the board and to help. Outside of a member-driven organization, these are folks who are typically invited to join a board. So if you've ever heard like so-and-so was invited to sit on the board for whatever, that person oftentimes isn't even affiliated with the board or with the organization. They are there to provide whatever other expertise they have to that board to help them with their board function. And then you have people who are non-director officers. So we have a chief of the Council of Senior Druids whose job is to be the chief of the Council of Senior Druids, but who also sits on our board. The chief responsibility is to relay information between the board and the group that they're representing, but also to participate fully in board function. So if you're a non-officer director, you are specifically a member of the board. If you're a non-director officer, then you have another job.
Do the non-officer directors, are they prohibited from holding other positions within the organization, or it's just unrelated to their duties on the board?
Other positions that they hold will not put them on the board.
Okay, so like we could have an NOD who is regional druid of Heartland region, right? Like Thex could be an NOD,
Yes.
but the RD-ness of that has nothing to do with the NOD-ness of things.
Correct.
Okay.
You could, it's legal, yes.
Okay.
Is it a best practice? Most of the reason that your non-officer director doesn't have another job, they're not wearing another hat, is because you want people on the board whose job it is to manage the board. They're not divided between multiple different priorities. They are specifically focused on board function, board governance, managing projects. They oftentimes head a committee for a specific reason or something that like there's a program that they want to do. So non-officer directors are specifically, the hope is that they are specifically doing board work, and that's it.
We have a question from the chat. Do both have votes? And then another one about treasurers we can go back to.
The people who get both votes on your board depend on what your bylaws say. You get to decide who gets a vote. You can also have non-director officers who don't sit on your board. We have a series of folks. We have like we have chairs of specific groups. Like we have someone who's over publications. We have someone who's over our social media stuff. We have someone who manages communications and PR. And those people, they report up through the board, but they don't sit on the board.
And they are they are sometimes invited to board meetings to share their expertise.
Yes.
But they're not a regular attendee.
Correct. You can ad hoc add anybody that you want to any board meeting if they have something specific that you want to discuss with them. Sometimes it is easier to have a discussion than it is to have them send you an email or to send you a report. And if it's better to have a live conversation, invite them to your meeting.
For example, right now, the Mother Grove meetings have Benjamin, who's in charge of the new website, coming to all the meetings because that is a project that doesn't make sense for him to try and give us updates in an email.
Correct. It's also usually common to put them at the beginning of your agenda and then to allow them to leave when their piece of the agenda is over.
We also had a question about treasurers. Should treasurers have access to bank accounts?
Ideally, no. Ideally, you do not want the person who has oversight for your finances to also be able to spend money, because that is how you set yourself up to have somebody steal money from your organization. Not saying that all treasurers are going to steal money. You don't want to put people in a position where they could be accused. It is best practice to have the person who manages all of your accounting not also be a signatory on any of your accounts. They should have access to see like reports, all of your like bank statements and everything. But ideally, they will not have control of any accounts that access money. They would have read-only access.
And so who do you recommend have like signatory access?
So I have a whole section on finances that we can get to, but the short answer is that ideally you would want the person who is most likely to need to spend the money. For example, for us, for a long time, the person who had access to the bank account was Rev William, because we ran all the Grove events from our house. And so if we needed to go and get firewood for the fire, or if we needed to go get grains, or if we needed to go to the liquor store so we could make spirit offerings, it was easier for him to just go to the store and get those things and give the receipts to the treasurer to make sure that everything was managed. We also moved away from reimbursement, and we had a Grove debit card so that all transactions are completely tracked and we're not constantly having to send money back and forth between people. So it really is up to you what you want that to look like.
We have in at Three Branch River, the treasurer keeps all of the accounts, but the secretary takes all receipts and gives them to the treasurer and documents it. And all of our checks are two-party checks with the senior druid and the secretary being the signatories on it. However, we've got a debit card that anybody can use, which I'm still trying to figure out how that actually tracks with our bylaws, but I think we probably need to amend them.
It's always worth after, a good 3 to 5 years, it's always worth going through and looking at your policies. Does the way that we're doing it match what it says we're supposed to be doing? Have the rules around what we're supposed to be doing changed? Do we want to change anything because the environment has changed and the way we're doing it doesn't work anymore? There's periodic review of your processes is a great practice. I always recommend 3 years because the government cares about your documentation every 3 years. Okay, boring writing. My favorite part. Let's talk about required documents and other fun stuff. I pulled code from Colorado because it's just the easiest for me to speak about as an example. All organizations are required to have articles of incorporation and bylaws. That's actually universal. I pulled this screenshot from I pulled this information from the corporate records in the Colorado Nonprofit Corporations Act. However, all organizations are required to have articles of incorporation, and you're also required to have bylaws. It gets filed with your Secretary of State when you apply for your EIN, your articles of incorporation, and your bylaws typically don't get turned in, but if you get audited, they will request them because they need to look at what you say you're gonna do compared to what your records show you did to make sure that they match. Because keep in mind that your bylaws can say whatever you want, but when you're audited, the auditors will focus on either the state rule or the bylaws, whichever is more strict. So if you have bylaws that are more strict than the state requires, you're going to be held accountable to your bylaws. So do your boring writing responsibly. Additional required records. Most folks require you have minutes of all meetings of the board of directors, record of all actions taken without a meeting. So if you have a Grove chat where you're making decisions, those records, like those decisions, need to make it into minutes at some point. Anytime that there is a board committee in place of the board that makes decisions, you have to have records of that. List the names of all members in alphabetical order by class, showing the number of votes which each member is entitled. Copies of resolutions, any minutes of member meetings, records of all actions taken by members without a meeting for the past 3 years, copies of written communications within the past 3 years, and a list of all the names of businesses or home addresses of all your current directors and officers. Yep, that's a lot. So let's break that down. This is also what my to-do list looks like at work sometimes. Okay, so what do you need? So you only have to write 3 things. Articles of incorporation, which if you are an existing organization, that's done. Bylaws. If you're an existing organization, also done. You do need to keep them up to date. Typically, the articles of incorporation don't change, but your bylaws are routinely updated. And you have to have a directory. What to keep on hand? Get in the habit of saving everything. Any minutes that you take, any newsletters that you send out, all your financial reports, any board decision that is made, just keep all of that. You don't have to try to figure out like, oh, how do we keep our minutes, and how do we write a newsletter, and what do we need? How do we document board decisions? You could take screenshots of stuff if you want. You just have to have it all organized in a way that someone else can follow along with what you did. The articles of incorporation is pretty simple. It's a form. It includes the name of your organization, what your purpose is, your mission statements, what your address is, what your mailing address is. Your official street address can't be a PO box in most states, but your mailing address can. Who is responsible? You need a registered agent. And then what you're going to do with your money if your nonprofit organization closes. In ADF, because we have an umbrella organization, the statement for distribution of funds upon dissolution, that is handed to you and is required to be included in your bylaws because the government said we have to. And that's it. And it's a form and you just fill in the boxes. In addition, you must also prepare and adopt your bylaws, prepare and adopt a conflicts of interest policy, and prepare and adopt any compensation policies that you want to have. You should have those prepared prior to you beginning operations with your EIN in place, so that if anybody wants to look at them, you have them, because you need to be able to produce them on demand. Bylaws. Basically, your bylaws are the instructions for how your organization manages your internal affairs. How big is your board? What does your board do? What are the roles of all of your officers? What are your meeting procedures? What are your election procedures? What's your conflict of interest policy? Do you have membership guidelines? What's your conduct? What's your expected conduct or behavioral expectations? And then what's the process to amend your bylaws? In a subordinate organization, the distribution of funds upon dissolution statement, as I said, needs to be in there, because you will not have your own articles of incorporation, and that's okay. You may have a form that you filled out when you filled out your request to become an organization, which is fine, but you don't really have to worry about too much of the details in that, because you'll get a lot of information given to you by your parent organization. The IRS requires you to have bylaws. So even though you don't have to submit them, you have to have them. Even if you don't have to file an annual return, you may still have to report any changes to the determinations office. Some states require you to file your bylaws and report any changes or any time that your bylaws are updated. Your state does, not ADF. ADF requires us to send them our bylaws when we update them, but that's because if we get audited, they want to make sure they have copies of any required documents. But anytime that you are audited, the bylaws are required. And make sure that you are in the habit of maintaining an address book for all your people. In an audit situation, you do not want to have to compile your directory in real time. If you're big enough, you may want an org chart as well so that everybody knows who's responsible for what. If your bylaws or your incorporation requires you to have events, specific events, as a church, we have to say what our order of service is and when we're going to celebrate. So you have to have some sort of proof of hosting. You can use a calendar of events. You can use records of attendees. You can use head counts, copies of liturgy. The government may not take your omens as proof of the event, but I still highly recommend that you keep track of all of your omens and do a periodic review. And most states require at least an annual meeting that is open to the public. Just so you know. A lot of groves don't have this problem because all of their business meetings are open to whoever wants to show up. They don't have closed meetings. But if you have a small group and the board operates pretty much by itself because you're just managing small things that other folks don't really it would be in the weeds for other folks to be talking about with you. You still have to have at least one annual meeting, an annual general meeting open to the public. You can produce an annual report in lieu of an actual hosted meeting as long as you have an open comment period and you allow people to bring comments to you or questions and you provide answers to them within that period. There are some large organizations that do that because it is just less cumbersome than having a giant meeting where people can bring up questions or concerns. It just really depends on what works best for you and your size. Most of us in the pagan community, our groups are small enough that we can have an annual meeting or more frequently if we want.
We have a couple of questions backing up in the chat. Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Regarding articles of incorporation and bylaws, do any of those have to be in hard copy?
No. If your bylaws require you to have a signed copy, then you would. But you can have. I do recommend version control and printing it to PDF with a version number and a revision date or an accepted date on the bottom. You should have some sort of a vote that the bylaws have been approved. So those records would also be in your meeting minutes somewhere. But you do not have to have hard copies of things. That's not required. Ideally, you'll have something that you can quick hit print on if somebody does want a hard copy, but most of the time they're going to ask you to submit a soft copy of something. And we actually have a section where we talk about audits and what they're going to ask you for.
For the address book, what info should we maintain?
You need the name, address, and phone number of all of your directors and officers.
And then for the annual meeting, is the annual meeting rolling calendar year or fiscal year? Or something else?
Whichever one. If you're running on a fiscal year, you need to have one per fiscal year. Every 12 months, you should have at least one open meeting that anybody in the public can attend.
So for that annual meeting, if the cadence changes, do you still have to have one every 12 months, or can the change allow it to be like every one meeting will be in 14 months and then it'll go back to?
I would, if you're going to change your meeting cadence, I would recommend having your annual report sent out early and having a comment period, and then or telling them, here's the annual report. Comment period is open between now and the in-person meeting so that it's clear that you communicated widely and allowed comment within 12 months.
Thank you.
Welcome. It's not a rolling 12 months. So as long as you have a thing that could potentially count, within each fiscal year or in calendar year, if you don't have a separate fiscal year, you should be fine. If you provide other documentation to folks often and you have a routine way for people to contact you, sometimes you can use that as a way to have your auditor be kind about the change in your schedule. It just really depends on why you're being audited and what types of information they're asking you for. If you're looking for a way to manage your documents, I suggest a Google for Nonprofits account. Um, it gives you a lot of protection from your like our nonprofit Google account has a managed drive, and the president manages that drive. So unless you belong to my organization or you are added to a specific document, you can't get into my documents. And that is it's really nice to have that level of protection. There's lots of other places that will give you stuff for free as a nonprofit. So keep your EIN handy. It gets you free stuff. Okay, so it is 10:41. Looking at where we're at, I have nonprofit finances, risk management, and audit left. Do we want to discuss more questions and then talk about money and auditing in a different session? Do you want me to power through some of this? Do we want to talk about the audits or some risk management and then have a separate class on finances? What do you guys think? What do you think would be useful to do right now?
I would love to have a separate class on finances so that it can be longer and more like not feel rushed and stuff.
Same.
Okay. I can do the risk management and auditing stuff in about the 20 minutes or less that we have left. Does that sound useful, helpful?
Yeah, I think we should do
Fantastic.
that and then just do a separate class entirely on money.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so let's skip ahead to risk management. And since my senior druid is on here, I'm going to ask Jane to please make note that we need another session on finances. So risk management. So this is all the stuff that falls under shit happens. Because stuff happens, like conflicts arise, mistakes are made. The integrity of your organization is not about you being perfect. It's about what happens when something doesn't go correctly. If something goes wrong, or if you make an error, what do you do with it? That's the measure of the integrity of your organization. Money issues freak people out. You know, you get that Grove debit card, everyone's super excited, and then someone goes to Chipotle and pulls out their Grove debit card and buys their stuff, and when they're putting it back in, they realize, holy crap, I'm holding the Grove card. I just bought myself lunch with the Grove card. Oh my God, panic, panic. It happens. It happens. We don't want it to happen, but sometimes it does. What happens if you lost your receipts for something? What happens if you are counting your petty cash and it doesn't match? Like what do you do? Money issues in all cases can be handled with documentation. All you have to do is make a record of what happened and then show clearly that you've made the organization whole. And on the audit people will be like, that's great. So fill out, if you've spent your money at Chipotle on the Grove card, then oops, fill out the form and pay the Grove back. You lost a receipt using the debit card. That's not as much of a problem because you will have that documented on your bank statement. Fill out the form that states the receipt was lost and staple it with where all your other receipts go on the bank statement. If you don't have a debit card, no receipt, no reimbursement, period. And don't cave on that. I spent $45 to buy all of this crap for the Grove. No, I don't have a receipt. Well, then no, you don't get reimbursed. Hard stop. And some people will be very upset with that, but you have to document things very clearly and you can't just give people money. Otherwise, it looks like I spent $45 on grain and wood. Okay, well, thank you for your donation. No, I want reimbursed. Well, because now without a receipt, it can look like you're buying that from that person. Petty
Question
cash
on
amounts are
that.
off. Recheck all your receipts, recheck the counts, fill out a form for your investigation. change the lot code. It's useful if someone donates back any missing money. If you have too much money, assume that's an accounting error. Too much money is just as bad as being short because it represents poor accounting. No one expects you to be perfect. They do expect you to document what happened and to learn from your errors. Expense reimbursement report. So we have a form that you put your name in here. That's our treasurer. You put your purpose in the line that says business purpose, and you put your date. And then the category is a drop down, and it will tell you, like, when you select one of these, that's the category it is. What was the date of your expense? What was the description? How much did it cost? If you have multiple receipts, you can put them all on here. It does the math for you. And then the person who spent the money and the treasurer should both sign this and then print it to PDF, and then put it in your records. Put your receipt on it, staple your receipt to it. Oh, that's great. Discrepancy reconciliation. So in our policy, we actually have a discrepancy reconciliation process that talks about what you have to do, how to complete the form, complete the expense reimbursement form. You know, and having instructions before something happens is really helpful. Other non-compliant events, money is the one thing the government cares about. They care about it the most. They care about it more than anything else in the whole wide world. And not all compliance issues are about money. It's useful to have a standardized way to report any event that didn't follow expectations, especially if it contradicts one of the organizational documents. So let's say you had to kick someone out of an event for disruptive behavior, or you had to cancel an event for an inimical creed reason, which has happened to a group that I know. Someone got hurt at your event. Someone had something stolen while at your event. Anything else that happened that wasn't planned and is a potential risk or a conflict of interest. You just need an event report form. So you create a form, and then you name it, and it can be the name of the event that you're at, the date and time of the event, where you were, the facts of the event, who was involved, what the immediate outcome was, and then the impact or potential impact on those involved. And then you need to take the report and do a root cause analysis, like what went wrong that caused this to happen? What was the thing that we missed that we need to make sure that we don't leave in place again? Anything else that you uncover that needs to be addressed to mitigate that risk. And then what lessons did you learn? What went well during the immediate events response? What could have done better? Maybe you need to have a Grove first aid kit that lives in your in your Hallows, so that when you go to set up a remote event, that you have everything with you. And then if you have any additional action items, assign those to a person and make sure that you have a date that it was completed. Because if you have a report form that says, we're going to fix the problem with not having a first aid kit on hand and make sure it's in the Grove kit. If you say you're going to do that, but then you don't, or you don't have record that happened, then that's one of those things where the auditor will start asking more questions. So just say, all right, pick on Rev Jan. Jan, you've got the Hallows, so you are responsible for putting the first aid kit in before the next event. And Jan says, on it. And then whenever it's done, Jan says, hey, I put the I got the kit in there. It's all ready to go. And then you fill out this form as completed, and then you're done. But keeping track of everything beginning to end is all they want to see. And if it's all on one page, a lot of times they won't ask you more questions, because they can see that you took this seriously and you tried to mitigate the risk to make sure it doesn't happen again. You assigned specific people to manage it, and then there was accountability for those action items. Does that make sense?
Could you give an example of what you'd have to do if you had to ask somebody to leave an event that's open?
Yeah, if you have somebody who is not following your code of conduct, The first thing you want to do is to pull that person aside and inform them, in case they didn't know, of your code of conduct. Let them know what specific behavior they are doing that is disrupting your event and where that is not in alignment with your expectations. It's helpful to have a written copy of your code of conduct so that people are aware that just you are new to our event, and I don't know if this was communicated to you, but we have a code of conduct for any of the people who attend our events. This thing that you did was not in alignment, and I wanted to give you a chance to read over our code of conduct and let me know if you have any questions, and then literally stand there and wait for them to read it. If you want, you can ask them to sign it. If the behavior continues after they have been thoroughly informed, then you can say, listen, we have already told you that this is not okay. It is a reasonable request for us to ask you to follow our code of conduct. So I'm going to have to ask you to leave the event. And if they say no and throw a fit, you can say, that's fine, but I'm responsible for this event and what's happening here. And if you are going to refuse to leave, I'm going to have to call the authorities to have you removed. And most people will just leave. They might throw a fit about it. But you have to put your compliance hat on and use your mom voice sometimes and set very clear and hard expectations with people.
What would you list then as your actionable item to prevent it in the future?
One of the things that you could, so it really depends on what you, what actually works for your organization. So if you have events that are open to the public, that are posted through like Facebook, you could put your code of conduct on the website, or on a link to it on your website, or post it directly into the event and say, please read over this before you attend, to make sure that everybody is aware of code. Make sure that they're also aware that if any violations, you will get one warning and then you'll be asked to leave. But it really just depends. If you are in a remote place and a lot of people who show up don't necessarily come from an online invite, you may want to have them available, have something laminated at a sign-in table and ask people to read it as they're entering your event. It just really depends on what's going to make the most sense for what you're doing and what's going to be the most impactful to make sure that doesn't happen again. Clear communication, clear as kind. Be open and clear with what expectations are, and let people know exactly what behavior they are showing that is in violation. This thing you did violates this.
From a risk perspective, you also want to make sure, like, one of your action items could be, if you're not hosting events on private property, that like you have a right to be there, that you are reserving space. So like for Three Cranes Grove, as we got bigger, we no longer just claim a random shelter at parks. We reserve a shelter at parks because that gives us the authority to be there and ask people who aren't supposed to be there to leave. Whereas if we were just squatting in a public place, like we couldn't really ask anyone to go anywhere. So that could be an action item too, is making sure you have stuff in place to legally be where you are. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because if you are in if you're squatting, if your event is squatting, then if someone refuses to leave, like you can't really ask them to leave, and if they refuse, then you would have to potentially relocate if it was that disruptive. If you don't have any legal recourse, there's a good chance that they will not, the police will not help you if you call them.
Unless there is some kind of actual disturbance.
Yes. Unless they
So
break the law.
unless they break the law. So as soon as personal experience, as soon as there was a fist, the police were called and they responded. So.
Yep.
Thankfully not at a Grove event. That was at a different public place event. That nobody's ever swung fists at a Grove event.
Yeah. It's unfortunately easier when they break the actual law and not just your code of conduct, but it's always horrible for everyone involved. And I hope that never happens to any of us. And if it does, it's small. Basically, record and retain everything that you do. When something happens, record what happened, and then record what you did about it, and then record the thoughts you had about it, and record the changes that you make. Write everything down. The more that you can record, the easier it will be for you to explain your actions later if you get audited. So what happens if you get audited? What is this? I keep saying audit. What does that mean? If you are selected for an audit, which can happen, your org will receive a letter from the IRS at your listed address. Audits are not only performed when you are suspected of non-compliance. You can be audited because you were randomly chosen, because sometimes, some years they decide we're going to check 10% of all of the people who only have to do an e-postcard with us. And then they will decide to audit you. They'll do a field audit sometimes where a person will come to you. It may be a correspondence audit where you have to send them requested documentation. And sometimes someone will come for a non-audit, which is just a compliance check where they wanted to just kind of do an unofficial discussion with you about some of your processes. Any type of audit can become a field audit where they will send a person to you if they find anything in those other types of audits. So keeping yourself prepared for that is to perform an organizational assessment. Those are all the big words for organizational assessment. Basically, just assess what you're doing. How are we doing? Are we in alignment with what we said we were going to do? Do we have all the documents we need to have? Part of this can be that every 3 years you fill out that Form 990 and make sure that you have all of your documentation in a row as expected from the form. The National Council of Nonprofits has some organizational assessment tools. They have instructions and an online checklist that you can actually check and then print when you're done. It's really cool. It's really helpful to do a board assessment to make sure that your board is functioning as expected. The board assessment checklist from the Nonprofit Leadership Center is really good. There's also a link to board retreat information. I do recommend that your board of directors have a retreat of some sort. Larger organizations will sometimes do an on-site retreat where they will have all of the board members travel to a specific place, especially if you are located in multiple locations. You can have your board may have a day retreat where they just meet for a whole day and go over things like the board assessment or anything else that would be useful. Sometimes you can do it online. It's really recommended that you do some sort of in-person thing. And it's not a long business meeting. There should be additional work that you're doing at your retreat. And there's a link to that here as well. Assess your paid officer and volunteers. If you pay people or if you have volunteers who are routinely with you, how's that going? Do a volunteer survey. Do your volunteers feel like they're getting what they need out of this work? Do they feel like it is worth it to them? Definitely do an assessment of everybody that you pay, some sort of annual assessment or biannual assessment or whatever makes sense for you, especially anybody who's under contract. And give people feedback often. Feedback doesn't mean tell them what they're doing wrong. Feedback is an important part of your organizational culture. Tell them what they're doing well as part of that, because that is also a way to build relationships and helps people feel like the work that they are doing super matters because you have noticed it and you have recognized it, and it will motivate people to want to give more. And then I have resources. So there's a list of books here. There is a whole host of links here to get you guys started. I included links to Colorado, Ohio, and Wyoming here because I knew for sure that those were states that would be represented at this meeting. So you're welcome. I'm happy to help anybody from a different state look things up if you want. Just let me know. And I also have a link to some articles that might help with anything else that you're working through. So if you have questions, you can email them to me directly, or you can hit me up in any of the other places where I live. I don't use Facebook a lot, but I do use Facebook Messenger most of the time, so you can send me a message. So yeah, what additional final questions or thoughts do you have?
We have a few money-related questions in the chat. Do you want to take those now or at our next class? I can hold them over if you want.
let's look at the questions and see if it's going to be covered in the next class.
Sure. Okay, so I have, this might be more of a finance related than a risk management question, but do you have info on what revenue streams, on revenue streams and what is appropriate? For example, I know pagan churches that furnish regular ceremonies and trainings, but they're financed by their thrift store or online business activities.
Okay, so financed by their thrift store. So the thrift store is, so the pagan church operates a thrift store. Am I understanding that correctly?
There, yeah, this was my question. And yeah, so I actually know a completely separate from ADF, a group that very similar, where they have priests, a whole structure and all that good stuff. They're incorporated, etc. And one of the things they do to create revenue is they actually operate kind of an independent thrift store. It doesn't even carry the name. For all intent and purposes, it's just a business, you know, on Main Street kind of vibe. But they do collect that revenue. And then they also do online classes, which are more related possibly to a mission or by law kind of layout. But I wasn't sure, you know, if that's appropriate, or I think I've heard through the mill a little bit about taxable versus exempt activities where, hey, you can do that, but that's got to be taxed, that revenue itself, versus
Yep.
clergy kind of work.
Okay, so money that your organization makes from stuff that is related to the operation of your org to meet its mission. That is all related income, and it just counts as your incoming revenue stream. If you are engaging in anything that makes money that is unrelated to your mission, that is now potentially subject to unrelated business income tax, the UBIT. There's a whole section on it in the finances part, so there are resources. The bottom line is that the first $1,000 that you make in a year is yours. If you make more than $1,000 of unrelated business income, you have to file a 990T to pay taxes on just that money. It is helpful to keep your finances for your church and your finances for the unrelated business venture thing separate. And the reason for that is because we don't want to tax churches for their like Sunday bake sales. Like that's dumb. Like, no, there's nothing about having a bake sale that actually is part of the mission of a church. And it's really nice to have refreshments, but we also don't want to just give them away. We can't afford that. A lot of places get around that. Speaking of bake sales and things like that, is you can offer goods if you tell people that the suggested donation is $1, but be prepared to give it away for free if someone says, I don't have $1. So my donation is to tell you thank you. But if you're actively selling things and the way that you're selling something is not different from how that's handled in the corporate world, that is an unrelated business income, and it is subject to taxes.
Thank you for that. And then just to kind of conclude that, you know, specifically, I want to look at eco-spirituality, training people in my church or center to do horticulture-based activities and skills. If that's listed as my mission, you know, within that guise, would that count then, even though it's kind of, you know, trade skill worthy?
As long as you can tie it back to your mission statement, it can count as part of the work of your organization.
Okay.
It might be useful to go over mission drift at some point. It is helpful to look at your mission statement. When you're doing your organizational assessment, look at your mission statement and then look at what it is that you're doing and make sure that you can logically tie those back to your mission. If you cannot, then your work has drifted away from your mission. And that happens sometimes. That's not always bad. Yes, it can mean that you are not complying with your mission. And it can also mean that the needs of your community have changed. or what you used to provide to people no longer matches, because technology has changed. And so now it's become obsolete. So now you have to rewrite your mission statement. So it's mission drift isn't always bad, but it's a sign that there's a misalignment between what your organizational listed purpose is and what your actual in practice purpose is. And you want to bring those back into alignment as soon as you realize that there's drift. Some people, when they start a new organization, they write what they think their mission is. And then as they get into practice, they realize, the more that we're doing this, and now that we've got boots on the ground, these are the things that really mean the most to us. We're most passionate about this. And so you may see yourself revising your mission statement once a year for the first 3 to 5 years of a new nonprofit, until you kind of land in that place where you want to be. Don't be afraid to revise your mission statement. But if you're in an umbrella organization, your mission statement is dictated by your parent organization. So please try to keep that in mind. You can have your own, I encourage you to have your own mission statement, but your mission statement should also be in alignment with the ADF umbrella mission statement, because it is ideally the parent organization mission statement would be broad enough to allow you to be a little more specific if you had specific things you want to do, or so that you can kind of tailor the mission for your own grove in a way that fits better with where you're standing than where the parent organization is. So that's that. I have so much more I could say. I know we've run over. I can stay for a while if anybody else has more questions. I want to be respectful of people who have other places to go. So if you have questions, I can stay for a bit. We will put together a second class that will do a deeper dive into nonprofit finances. I have some examples and I have some other spreadsheets and things that I can share with you. So we can kind of get into the weeds of that a bit. And if you have other questions, please feel free to bring those back to the next session or to email me, and I'm happy to help with whatever you have. If you have a specific need that is impacting your direct organization, I'm also here to help. Slide deck. I will print the slide deck to PDF, export it so you can click the links, and I will put that as well as the glossary of terms into this event. When we create the second event, I will put them into that event as well. So please look at the files in the events. I'll get that done within the next half hour.
Missy, if we would like to donate for your time, should we donate to you or to Magpies?
Please, mountainancestors.org is our website, and we have a donate here PayPal button that goes to the Grove's PayPal if you would like to donate to the Grove, and that's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane, my senior druid has the link. Awesome. Thank you guys. Those were a lot of really great questions. Great conversation. I appreciate you. I was worried I was just going to be talking and everybody would fall asleep.
I don't think so. Not with this audience. We're all too elbow deep in keeping this thing running.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Awesome.
That's the biggest problem that I run into is as the senior druid, the old adage that, 10% of the people do 90% of the work.
Yep.
We get so busy doing the work that we sometimes have trouble keeping up the documentation.
Yep. All right, I'm going to pull the financial stuff out of this PDF and make or out of this PowerPoint and make a new PowerPoint with just the financial stuff and expand the data a bit. If you have any financial questions that you want to email to me ahead of time, please feel free to do so, and I will include that information in the slides for the next class.
Jane is awesome, so I know my question is already lined up.
Good. I was going to ask, is this a good time for people?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
As long as it's not the second Sunday of the month, then yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Good, unless it's next weekend, in which case I'm busy planning Lunasa, so.
There. It will not coincide with the high day. I promise you that.
Okay.
You said the second.
Second Sunday is Mother Grove and Clergy Council officer meeting, so.
Okay.
But I
Perfect.
also will just call you, but this presentation is very helpful, so.
Oh, good. Awesome. Sweet. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so glad that you came. I'm so glad you brought questions. I love talking about this stuff. And not a lot of people find it super interesting. So I really appreciate your engagement in this. So I wish you guys many blessings, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.
So much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank
You
you
too.
very much. Bye.
Thank you so much for
Bye-bye.
attending.